Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on how to build a social sustainability program that fosters organizational success. My name is Paige Regas. I'm the demand generation specialist at IsoMetrix, and I'll be your host for today's session. Our speakers today are Andrea Korney, the VP of Sustainability at Frostbyte Consulting, and Robin Bolton, IsoMetrix's ESG principal. Together, they have 50+ years of experience working on social sustainability initiatives. Andrea has over 25 years of experience working in various sustainability-focused roles in the oil and gas, power generation, and mining sectors. She's worked across North America and Russia. Her expertise in social sustainability lies in managing stakeholder relations, Indigenous relations, and government affairs. She joined Frostbyte Consulting as the VP of Sustainability in 2018, and she frequently contributes to panel discussions, articles, and white papers addressing social and environmental sustainability topics. Robin started consulting in the social and environmental sustainability field back in the year 2000. He primarily consulted within the mining, oil and gas, and infrastructure sectors, as well as with financial institutes. He's worked in sustainability across Africa, the Middle East, and North America. In 2017, he joined IsoMetrix as the lead sustainability executive, and now he's in the ESG principal role, helping us to develop state-of-the-art solutions for sustainability and ESG management. Here's a little about IsoMetrix. So we are one of the world's leading providers of enterprise software for governance, risk, and compliance. And for the past 25 years, our mission has been to focus on delivering hyper-agile and fully integrated solutions for environmental, social, and governance, environmental sustainability, social sustainability, which we'll show you today, environment, health, and safety, enterprise risk management, internal audit, and compliance. With offices in Atlanta, Toronto, Perth, London, and Johannesburg, and implementation partners on 4 continents, IsoMetrix is geared to service organizations at a global and a local level. Our software has won multiple awards, and we have over 25 years of experience working in high-risk industries. We are proud to have the highest customer retention rate in the space at 95%, and to work with companies in over 100 countries around the world. In terms of the agenda, first I'll hand over to Andrea Korney, VP of Sustainability at Frostbyte Consulting, so she can briefly introduce herself and the company she represents, and then she'll explain how to build a world-class social sustainability program that contributes to the bottom line. Next, we'll hand it over to Robin Bolton to present a live demo of how IsoMetrix's stakeholder-centric software can be used to ensure all social sustainability obligations are met. And finally, we'll conclude the session by answering the questions you've submitted. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Andrea now to begin her presentation. Okay, Andrea, over to you.
Good morning. I'm Andrea Korney with Frostbyte Consulting, and I'm happy to be here to speak with you today about social sustainability. So just to tell you briefly about who Frostbyte is, Frostbyte Consulting is a boutique firm based out of Calgary, Alberta in Canada. However, it's a global firm that focuses primarily for the last 20 years on EHSQ technology enablement and management services throughout the multiple industries, specifically energy, mining, construction, and we have offices in Canada, US, Europe, and Australia. Here's to give you an example of Frostbyte's global reach. As I mentioned, where we have offices, but we also have consultants globally that can handle all of your needs in the environmental health, safety, and quality area, as well as sustainability. So just to give a brief overview and a kind of reminder for those of us who are joining about what sustainability is. Sustainability is the intersection where economic development is viable and bearable in a way that is enjoyed equitably by the social stakeholders in the area where projects are being delivered. It's really evolving lately, and most of you are joining the call today because of the commitment that your companies are making to sustainability and trying to learn more. You're not alone in this. Today, we're going to do a deeper dive for you on the social side of sustainability. When we're talking about social sustainability, the focus here really is the balance of the growth of the economy, but also the consumption of the resources and the impact to the society that we're taking those resources from, and making sure that it's equitable and also a benefit to the society without overly using the resources or overly consuming the resources because of the growth. Some of the current state things that we're seeing, as I mentioned, is we're seeing a growth in ESG and sustainability focus overall. However, there's still a bit of a lack of understanding what the social sustainability impact is to the bottom line, which is one of the reasons why we're meeting with you today, to really do a deeper dive on what that is and what really good social sustainability programs can do for you in your organization. Typically, in the last few years, the focus has been on diversity and inclusion and the concept of social license to operate, with some movement into supplier diversity. But there's still quite a few issues that we've noticed, specifically in North America, with some of the political concerns and during some of the elections that we've had, of people really raising some of the issues that are still here in North America, and we're seeing this trend all across the world. Possibly never as obvious to us as what we've gone through in the last year and a half with the pandemic, really helping us see where social sustainability and our fellow man are important. Also, we're seeing a lot of developing programs and software to support the growth and the change in social sustainability. Today, the platform that we're going to show you is one that is really looking at helping us tie together some of the tools and technology that's available for tracking and doing a better job with the programs that you're creating. Some of the trends that we're seeing, I call it stakeholder management to stakeholder capitalism. And what that means is it's simply not about managing just stakeholder expectations anymore, but it's shifting to the actual stakeholder capitalism, where consumers and stakeholders are using their investment and their consumer dollars to drive new expectations from the corporations that they interact with or buy from. On top of that, some of the expectations that you're seeing through that are a focus on human rights throughout the supply chain. People are aware of where they're buying things from, where things are made, and the ways that people are treated along that supply chain, as well as they're looking for and expecting a competitive and level playing field for suppliers to do business with organizations and to work within those organizations as employees. And there's a trend moving to digital responsibility. So this is not only cybersecurity, but it's also responsibility in advertising and making sure that the messages that are sort of given to us through social platforms drive consumer behavior in a way that is responsible. A real focus, as I mentioned, on continuing to grow out and build capacity in the supplier diversity along the supply chain. Commitment tracking, we're going to dig into quite a bit in a couple of upcoming slides, so I'll leave that one to talk about later. As well, the concept of racial justice and environmental justice really emerging in North America as twin ESG missions, where people are starting to tie together that the inequalities that come out of environmental justice typically also have racial connotation tied to them. Some of the impacts of a social sustainability program and what it can mean for your organization, it really extends beyond just corporations, also to the investors of corporations, the taxpayers, and the communities that these corporations work in. And I have some case studies coming up to show how bad these things can get and what the impact truly can be. Where you see those things happen are in share price, in declining revenue for corporations that are doing a poor job, and that comes from a couple of different areas. Also, an increase of costs, and it's more expensive to do business without considering some of the innovation that's available, or without considering some of the priorities of the communities you work in. Also, just an overall reduction in productivity. Things take a lot longer. There's approval issues, and also with the additional cost piece and lack of revenue, then obviously there's a direct impact and tie to your profitability and to that triple bottom line that we always refer to. A lot of the impact that isn't understood is the long-term impact of reputational risk. These are looked at in a negative context in the slide, but you can also flip that to say the reputational opportunity is very significant if this is done well. As the same thing goes with job opportunity, jobs and opportunity losses along the supply chain, along the projects that are being created. If this isn't done well, it just takes away from the ability for these things to grow. One of the major things we'll talk about in this presentation is damage to historical sites and historical landmarks. This becomes very important when you're talking about consultation, access to land, preservation and respect to the communities and the people that have come before us, and making sure we're preserving all of that historical legacy. Also, there can be a lot of disruption if things aren't done well, and the case studies I'm about to show you show exactly what we mean by that. So in the announcement for the webinar, you would have probably seen this first stat. 73% of delays in oil and gas projects in the last few years were due to social factors, social delays, protests, concerns, access to permitting being held up. That also is seen in the mining industry, where from 2008 to 2016, 46% of metals and mining projects were delayed because of direct ties to social opposition. The thing that isn't covered in this slide is the number of projects that were potentially shelved because they just lost their economic viability because of these delays or because of the risk to the social community that these projects were intended to operate in. So some of the hard numbers, many of you from North America will remember not very long ago the case of DAPL. Energy Transfer Partners was looking to expand their business, and the Standing Rock Sioux Nation for 3 years, they actually put forward their complaints around the route that the pipeline was planning to take. And they had concerns about a lack of meaningful consultation to truly understand their historical landmarks, their concern about the impacts to the environment and waterways that were running through their nation. There was a very significant response socially, not just from the tribe themselves, but also from surrounding communities and people that were sympathetic to their expectations and their concerns. So what did that translate to? Enterprise Transfer Partners saw a share price reduction that was at least partially tied to the protests and the delays of 20%. That is compared at the same time to an overall S&P 500 increase in the same industry of 35%. So very significant, noticeable decline in their share price. This also equated to not less than $7.5 billion to Energy Transfer Partners and any of their partners with an ownership stake. An additional $4.4 billion to the financing banks and to the investors that were tied to this project in additional closed revenue and new accounts that they typically would have opened during this time frame. And then because of a lot of the cleanup that was required and issues that were happening in the area, another $38 million in losses to taxpayers and stakeholders. Keystone XL, I myself worked on this project previously, and many of you will know it because it's very topical today. TC Energy filed a lawsuit in August of this year for $15 billion to cover or to start to deal with the losses that they have faced as an organization due to the US government not allowing for the construction of this pipeline extension. They also report that there's a loss of over 11,000 jobs and $2 billion in wages in from Canada to the US. The major concern that was coming out of both of these pipeline projects are the Indigenous relations and access to land issues that come from any type of pipeline project or energy project, or really any expansion project in any industry. The request of Indigenous community is early consultation, effective consultation, knowing what to ask and how to track and how to make those commitments and keep those commitments. Also to track grievances and ensure that if there are any issues that arise during a project, that there's an effective way of managing them and solving those issues for the communities in the areas that are being disrupted. This has been supported by the United Nations in declarations on the rights of Indigenous peoples that have been supported by many of the world's nations and is continuing to get stronger with other projects that have come up in different countries to support Indigenous rights across the world. One of the things that we're going to show you later in the demo is how you can use technology to deal with some of those issues that I just mentioned. Taking that a step further and outside of the Indigenous community, one of the big focuses of the Department of Energy and just typically or generally across North America is the understanding of environmental and racial justice. And I mentioned that these are two twin ESG initiatives, and they really come together, bringing social and environment together. What you see here is some of the stats that you would see in this area, where more than half of the people who live within 1.86 miles of toxic waste disposal are people of color. The concept here being that typically people of color and from lower income communities feel they bear the burden of the environmental initiatives without getting in and enjoying the benefits of some of these energy projects in the same way that people outside of these communities are enjoying them. That's a concern, because one of the key components of sustainability, if you remember, is that this should be equitable in our society and that the development of business should be equitable. So what can you do? And the purpose of the demo that you're going to see in a few minutes, you really can start to look at how you can bring these elements into your program, into your company, so you can make sure that when you are doing business, you are having early consultation in your business development phase, so that you're building projects that have the ability to gain support of the communities you're working in. Before you start building them and before you start running into delays and before people start having concerns. So how can you do that? Start off by understanding your corporate sustainability maturity and the commitment of your company to that sustainability, to your sustainability goals. A really big thing is understanding the requirements for your specific industry and doing a materiality assessment in one of the many sustainability frameworks that exist: SASB, GRI, TCFD, there's a number of them. Complete a gap assessment on your current state and your desired end state. And then also, there is so much information available in your historical data, in particular in the data that you've been tracking in your EHSQ software. Gathering that information and putting it together to understand where you're at and where you can be is the first step. And some of the elements that are critical to the success is understanding your stakeholder landscape, beyond just your consumers, beyond just your neighbors. When you think about your growth plan and how your strategic plan for your company, truly understanding who all of your stakeholders are beyond just the investors is very important to understanding the value proposition and the opportunities that are available. Executive commitment from the C-suite all the way through the management team, but beyond commitment, truly understanding what sustainability is and what the goals of your organization are. Building a very effective program that includes your stakeholders, as well as capturing the data, all of that are critical to the success. Managing your stakeholder groups, product stewardship in your supply chain, understanding the human rights and the needs across your supply chain, as well as the limitations of where you are buying products from and also building your products in. continuing to track and build on your EHSQ, following the standards and the trends that are required in your industry, as well as when you make commitments in your community and on your projects, making sure you're tracking them, having appropriate initiatives that actually matter to the areas you're working in, and then of course measuring and reporting them. Some of the things that you can build is that stakeholder analysis and risk framework that I've been speaking about, as well doing a really intensive due diligence on your social and stakeholder risks. So understanding truly how your business is going to impact positively and potentially negatively as you continue to grow and expand. It's very important to have early disclosure of the social risk to your investors. Also, that gives you the opportunity to speak to how you're mitigating those risks and creating opportunities. Executive level support is not enough, and I cannot continue to say it. There's one of the biggest issues that we face in social sustainability programs is having a nice program without seeing actual money and budget being put into the development of those programs, the tracking of the effectiveness, and really the value that is making its way back into the communities you're working in. Attached to that, having fabulous socioeconomic plans that truly meet the needs of the community. And I like to joke and say extending beyond recreational centers. For a long time in my career, that was what was seen as like how you communicate or how you commit to a community is providing recreation centers. Those are wonderful, but it just can't stop there. Water treatment facilities, access to jobs, from an internal diversity and inclusion perspective, but also building a fabulous supplier diversity program where people can bring their small businesses and grow their small businesses along with you as you're developing. Local inclusion, spending money in the communities and areas where you work in. Head offices being in, Houston or up in Calgary, where all of that money is, kind of trickling back to, is not enough. Then we need to see and track the commitments that you're making and the money you're spending in hotels when you're on a project route, restaurants. What is the true impact you're leaving in the local communities you're working in? And again, talking through those socioeconomic strategies and making sure they have the impact that you're looking for. So to summarize, I would like to just pull together that all of your goals and expectations that you put for your company as you're building out your projects and continuing to follow your strategic goals can be supported by companies like Frostbyte to help you with your consulting, and as well with IsoMetrix as you're building in your tracking and your trending and your early consultation and the programs that you're building. And Robin, who I'm about to pass this over to you, is going to show you the way that you can use the IsoMetrix tools to do that. Thank you again.
All right, thank you so much, Andrea. That was really an excellent presentation, and I already see we have some good questions coming in, but we'll save those until the end. So for now, I'd like to hand it over to Robin Bolton, who will show a live demonstration of IsoMetrix's social sustainability solution. IsoMetrix is one of the only GRC software providers that offers a standalone social sustainability solution. So we're really excited to show you how it can help address all the concerns Andrea just presented. All right, Robin, over to you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Paige. Thank you, Andrea. And it's fantastic to be with you all. And I really think you'll enjoy the next 30 minutes or so while I'll take you through our IsoMetrix presentation. Right, so there's a couple of components that I would like to take you through, show you some of the functionality, explain some of the benefits. And a good place to start would be on actually assessing risks. So for that, I'm going to open up a IsoMetrix module, which sits in our risk management set of solutions. For me, it's important to understand your social risk, and this is often done, and I think Andrea sort of touched on it during those initial studies, understanding your environmental impacts, environmental and social impacts. A lot of that information will be obtained up front in a project, and you've got to move on from that to be able to then manage that information, manage that data. When it comes to the social risks, I'm going to open up a record here to just demonstrate how the IsoMetrix risk module can capture that information and how you can manage it going forward. So this particular site has got records in, so I'm going to open up existing records to demonstrate this. So here's an example of a record. We are looking at, in this example, a utilities and services company, and here's an example of just the scope would be the social risks related to this particular aspect or unit of a business. It could be the other sectors of that business, construction. However, you define the scope, and then you're able to list specific impacts that you want to rate. Now, this is going to be socially related, and I'm going to select just an example of an assessment here. All right, and really what I wanted to bring out in this is that you have the ability to just unpack that specific aspect you want to assess. Interesting enough, you can define if it's actually an opportunity or a risk or a threat. We touched on opportunities earlier. But importantly, through 3 steps where you are going to identify the inherent risks related to, in this case, it was, in local employment expectations, so managing that expectation for employment. And we've got 2 examples here. So under a social impact or compliance impact, you can rate both that. Now, that would be an inherent risk with your knowledge of no controls in place. The next step is listing the controls that would be associated with that risk. Now, a company may well have controls or they may not have controls. In this example, we've listed a few controls, and I'm going to open one up just to explain something about this. Now, it's not just a control. A control may be effective or not. So you also have the ability to just rate that effectiveness of that control. So in this example here, we've got the ability to just rate how effective that control is actually working. So your knowledge as a person in the field may know of a control, but it's failing or not effective or very effective. So you can rate that control. And through that process of listing controls, understanding how effective they are, you are able to re-rate your same risks, but with those control knowledge in place. And in this example here, we move from a medium and a high to a medium and a medium. So your final risk comes out as medium. Now, what's important as well is, well, okay, that might be acceptable. It may not be acceptable. Your company threshold might say, right, all medium risks, we still have to action to reduce to low. And so you have the ability to set actions. Now, this is a very important feature of IsoMetrix and why management system brings advantages is because you can then track these actions, you can assign it to people, and you can then gauge whether an action is completed in time or overdue through the dashboards and other mechanisms. So an example here of an action, and I'm happy to open this up because this is a standard action feature throughout IsoMetrix, this is an example of just, right, we said the HR department needs to get involved in the employment policy and communicate this to the community. So that's an example of an action. It gets assigned to someone and it will always be in the system. Okay, so moving on from now, that's the risk aspect. So hopefully from that, you get a takeaway that you can now move your risks from perhaps a report or sitting in some sort of digital file to a live system that you can track. I'd like to move over now to more of the sort of managing sustainability aspects. Now, this is the IsoMetrix sustainability solution, various modules within it. And I'd like to connect a lot of what I'm going to present to what was spoken about earlier, and managing those obligations, ensuring that engagements happen, tracking initiatives and commitments, and importantly, that land access and resettlement, making sure that process is done effectively and so that it doesn't raise risks and delays to your project. So these are the 3 sections I'm going to focus on. This particular interface I'm showing you here has got some other functionality that's just common throughout IsoMetrix. 1 or 2 I might just mention on the end, but certainly the core is in the middle here. So let's start with the social engagement aspect, managing social engagements. Now, there's a stepwise process here. You've got to capture details of community. So I'm going to start off with stakeholder entity. We've got some information there I'd like to share. So these two modules, stakeholder individual, stakeholder entity, is really about just capturing the information on those two. And let me open up the entity record. All right, and then I'm going to bring up an existing record to just give you some detail of the information that can be captured under either an individual or an entity. The two modules are very similar. Okay, so here's an example of an entity that we've brought in the oil and gas industry to keep with that theme. Okay, the important aspects here that I want to just highlight is there's a lot of information we can capture about an entity, and by that it could be an organization, it can be a business, could be a government body, whatever that entity is. You can select it, you can capture information about that entity. You can state if that's an active entity or not, maybe it's moved out from an area you're working in, but these tabs along the bottom here, I'll touch on some that I find very useful. So you are sort of profiling that entity, giving details, contact information, who may belong to that entity, but importantly, what engagements you've had with that entity. Now that will pull from the engagements module that I'll touch on next. It loads it up here, so you've got that association. You can also analyze this entity, and to me, this is pretty important. So you can gauge, what's their interest in the project, what's their influence. They might have a very high influence, which will raise a flag for you to give special attention to them. And also, the support for the project. Do they support it or not, or neutral? So various indicators that will help you guide how you would manage certain entities. Just scrolling along. Similarly, if the grievance is raised by this entity, they will load up here so you can associate it. And adding a grievance will be a module I'll be coming on shortly. Okay, so the point here is a lot of information and intelligence on certain entities, or similarly the individuals. They're very similar modules. Moving on then, your engagement plan. What this really entitles you as an organization to is to make sure that any engagement does not slip, that you can set engagements for a period of time ahead, be it engagements with communities, government, investors, whatever your stakeholder may be, and set those up. And at the right period, an a record will be created in the engagement module, and you can go and complete that engagement. I won't take you through the engagement plan. I think the concept's quite easy, but let me show you a little bit more about the engagement process. The advantages here is that you can capture and keep a very tight record of that engagement. It can be called upon at any time. So let me just find a record while I talk you through it. And there's one here. Let me take this top one. All right. So the important part is also able to set actions that might come out of this engagement. So in this example here, we capturing information about looked like a public meeting with the community about an exploration along a certain river. So you capture the details, who attended. If there were grievances raised during that engagement, you can capture them here. What this does, and it's different from the engagement module or grievance module I'll come to, it creates an initial record that you can go in and complete if you add it through this shortcut, similarly to initiatives and commitments. So there's a lot from this engagement that may come out that you can capture, and importantly, actions. There might be an action from talking to these community members that you want to then track. All right, and then moving on to the complaints and grievances. So as important as the managing engagements, you have to treat complaints and grievances with the due respect and attention. What IsoMetrix has done is created this over many implementations of our systems and revisits and reviews to make sure that it's a robust and watertight approach to solving a grievance. So here's an example, but the steps I really wanted to take you through is it's a 4-step process of registering a grievance. What was your initial response? You've got ability to always attach information that might support your feedback. How did the investigation go? What were the findings? And what actions may be set from that investigation? So there may well have been actions that are needed to deal with this complaint. You set those, that standard IsoMetrix action module, and this grievance can only be closed once all the actions are closed. Grievance also has very strict permissions around it. We've had some implementations where a certain level of grievance could only be investigated and closed out by an independent third party. So, and that information would only be available to them. So this particular module does carry a lot of permissions and security around the data that's in it. Good, so let's move on to the next aspect of our solution, and that's the socioeconomic aspects. As a quick overview, it's really just to capture a variety of metrics. And the important part, and this links up also to what was mentioned earlier by Andrea, is being able to very clearly capture initiatives and commitments and track those and keep records of that. The difference that we've made between an initiative and a commitment is that initiative might be realized through a project, through observations of the needs of people or some sort of support that you would like to give, whereas a commitment might have been made in initial discussions with stakeholders. It might have been documented in the license agreements or the initial studies that were undertaken. Very sort of similar structure in the IsoMetrix module, but they do cater for different aspects. So just to talk about the supplier metrics, training metrics, workforce metrics, I'll open up a quick record in there just so you understand the purpose. All right, so this example here, an oil and gas project, just gives the ability to track the different suppliers that are used for a particular operation. So you can keep a track of who those suppliers were. This is pulling from a stakeholder entity module, so there's an association with that earlier module I mentioned. You're also able to track what's spent to the various suppliers. And that value is rolled up and you can see totals. You also have the ability to add supporting documentation to verify or provide evidence to any of your records. So the ability here is really just to track supplier details and the spend that you have on them. Next, it's the aspect of training metrics. Often this is an aspect in your social and environmental permits, conditions, licenses, that there's an upliftment of skills and you'd like to track that. It could be skills with employees, it could be skills within the suppliers or contractors, or it could be other upliftments that you decide to track. So let me again just show you some of the functionality and how to do this. So IsoMetrix has built this particular module at a high level, knowing that a lot of organizations may have their own training management systems in place. Two systems could talk to each other. The benefits that IsoMetrix will bring is we have the dashboard view of a lot of this, which I'll show you in a moment. Although the metrics might sit somewhere else, they can be integrated and linked into the IsoMetrix system, and then you've got visuals of it. So in this example here, we have tracked various local training information, contractors, employees, others. You can create different categories and the numbers are rolled up for a quick view. And as I said, then there's a lot of analysis on this when we get to the dashboards. And then lastly, on the tracking of metrics side, the workforce. This again links back to what might be some of the commitments made or upliftments that you would like to present to a project or a community. You know, what is your workforce breakdown? And therefore, this module is able to track those numbers. You can have access given to certain contractors or others to load their workforce information up. And I'll just give you a quick flash of how this looks. Right, so through various tabs, you can track your local workforce numbers in a variety of job categories or roles, a breakdown of that workforce. So it could be your local workforce, regional, national, and other tabs could be added if that's relevant to your particular project. Those are then rolled up to a total so that from a month to month or year to year basis, you've got those numbers to work with. You're also able to add some absenteeism numbers. You might be able to then see some trends that and flag some interesting information from that. In essence, it's there to just track those numbers so you've got visuals of it and you can compare that to any sort of a commitment or obligation that you've got to fulfill regarding the breakdown of your workforce. But I really wanted to show you these two modules, initiatives and commitments. These are great to be able to, as I mentioned earlier, capture the information on those initiatives and keep track of them until closure. Right, so let me bring up a record to give you a good example of this. Okay, so here we've got an example. This could really be an initiative that's implemented. We've used the example of a river cleanup. So an operation may work near a river. They've noticed the pollution in that river or something that they want to do to just improve the quality of that surrounding. So here's an example of just a river cleanup project a company may initiate. You capture the details. You can assess if there are any impacts related to that. In this case, we just listed it's a water and a waste related impact. But the important part is listing what obligations you would like to fulfill. Now, this would be obligations to you as a company. In this case, we've captured one about removing litter and identify areas of erosion. You then can also add actions to that. There could be many obligations to fulfill. We've just captured one example. You're also able to list certain indicators to prove how well you're tracking against this obligation. And also an evaluation. So you could go set a requirement that every month you go through and you assess or evaluate how well this project is doing. By that way, you can see if it is effective or not. And hopefully then by the end, by tracking it through IsoMetrix, you can have completed this initiative. You've got the information in the system. If there are any actions needed as you progress with this initiative, which might not go according to your plan, you can add those that will add to just ensuring this initiative is successful. You can track the status or progress of it, and this is displayed in dashboards so that any person can also come in who has access to IsoMetrix and see the status of any initiative and so forth. The commitments, as I mentioned, is pretty similar. I'll just highlight what IsoMetrix does slightly different here. Right, so this example we've brought up is a commitment for environmental monitoring of a river. This river may well be in close proximity to your operation. So you'll notice the structure is very similar to that of the initiative. You can track the progress. You can toggle the status between if it's in progress or completed. But importantly, also just tracking the requirements or the obligations. You could list those out. Similarly, do an assessment or evaluation. How well is this commitment being implemented and the actions? So just to reiterate, those two modules, the initiatives and commitments, it's there to ensure that what was promised to people early on in projects. We talked earlier about initial engagements. We've spoken about expectations of communities. and also what might be conditions or obligations in licenses and permits. This ensures that whatever was said is going to be managed. This avoids that problem of reputation and those other risks, social risks that might come up, where somebody might have promised something but it never materialized. By having a central system that can all be managed accordingly and ensured that those promises and commitments are fulfilled. Right, at this stage, I'm going to shift a little bit and show you some dashboards before we come to the last section about land management and resettlement. So let's go look at some visuals. Right, so we're on the dashboard layer. In this particular dashboard, there are many sheets, each feeding from information on one of those modules in the IsoMetrix system. I'm going to scroll down to firstly pick up on the stakeholder information. And I'm going to find one on stakeholder entities. That's one of those that I took you through. And I'm particularly just interested in showing you this. So here's a display of stakeholder entity information. Data can be displayed in a variety of ways. Here's an example of a tabular view. We can visualize it on maps and other aspects. You may have remember that in that stakeholder module I mentioned in that sort of assessment, that stakeholder might have a positive, support, negative, or neutral. So we've got sort of those rolled up. So you've got a quick view on, right, in this particular information in my database, this could relate to one project. We've got one negative entity, 3 are neutral, and it looks like 7 are positive. So that's probably quite a good setup, but however, you need to keep an eye on that negative entity. Data is displayed in a variety of ways. We can drill in through filters up top. I can also, if there's a particular entity I see here, I can also click and it'll take me back to the IsoMetrix system where I can view that full details that we saw earlier. I can also zoom in on the map and pick an entity and then find its information. So that just gives an idea of how some of the information can be displayed, which will hopefully bring more value out of it than just sitting in the system. I'd also like to show you a little bit on the engagements side. And I'm going to show you again one that displays them as in their location and as a table. The useful thing as well is I can export this information from this analytical layer. I can then export it to Excel or PDF. I can create presentations from it, but also once it's in a different format, you may use it and change its layout or whatever as you need for display purposes. I'm going to try scroll down and find a record I think we touched on earlier, which could have been this record here regarding the engagements on the St. Lawrence River gas exploration project. So that was a meeting you may remember I brought up. Here it is sitting in the system, and I've got a summary of the information here. And then the last one I want to touch on is regarding the complaints and grievances. I'll just flick through a few different sheets here, just so you can get an idea of how data can get displayed. When it came to grievance, I mentioned there were various steps involved. This particular display, by the size of the box, just shows the status of those different steps. So if I was in charge of a project, I could see 12 was closed. However, there's quite a large portion that's still under investigation, which is probably a little concerning. I want to find out why and ensure that they get addressed and closed as soon as possible. So various ways data can be displayed. I'm just going to scroll across to another sheet or two, really for the value of just displaying how data can be displayed. And then we're back to a similar view about showing where those grievances may be logged and the individual ones that I could then go into and find out more information. I can also, as I mentioned, add filters. I might just want to add a filter of those grievances that perhaps me as in a certain responsibility role might be needing to close out or action. I can add those filters and see what's assigned to me to action. Right, so that was just a change from the system to show you some of the analytics that can be displayed. And I'd like to then lastly touch on the land access and resettlement aspects. So tying again up with what Andrea mentioned earlier, that a lot of the delays in projects, a lot of the costs are related to incomplete engagements, related to where there are discrepancies or misunderstandings on land access, perhaps where there's impact on land access, or else resettlement is not managed appropriately. IsoMetrix has a various, let's say, versions of our land access and resettlement modules, from a lighter version to just track certain aspects to much more advanced versions where you can actually work out compensation rates and so forth. What we have here, and what I'll show you quickly, is the aspect of a land access to just track what's been done. And for that, I'm just going to bring up a record to just show you what information can be captured. And for that, I'm just going to open up this record and show you what it's able to do. So you can capture details of that land access agreement. You've got your supporting docs feature. So there might be a formal signed agreement with a landowner about accessing that land. It might be a road, a servitude, or it could be to pass through the land to access water, or whatever it may be. You can attach, upload or link to where that information, more information could be, but importantly, just summarize the details, track if there was a compensation agreement, track the compensation agreement. So on a monthly or quarterly or annual basis, you might have agreed to pay a certain amount over for access to that person's land. You can track that. And similarly, like I've said before, standard actions to just address if there are issues that come up that need to be addressed. So that's how IsoMetrix plays in the land access space. Again, there are dashboards that display certain information around here. And then on the resettlement module, functionality is a little more advanced here. So you can capture details of that resettlement that has to occur. Perhaps a pipeline is going through or near a populated area and some resettlement is needed. IsoMetrix in this case has designed a solution where it's assuming that all those resettlement agreements and calculation of resettlement costs and what resettlement is needed has been studied, documented, agreed to, signed off, and that can be added as the supporting doc. However, you can track aspects of that resettlement through the system, capture the details, what impacts might come up through that need managing, who is benefiting from this resettlement. Is it a stakeholder individual? This will be pulling from that very first module I touched on or mentioned about stakeholder individual, or is it an entity? You can then list who will be benefiting from this resettlement. Any specific obligations to fulfill? I would imagine there could be many, just to ensure that this resettlement is successful. What indicators you might want to list to track along the way? The contributions now relate back to a budget. So there may have been a budget approved for this whole resettlement process. So at set periods, it might be monthly. You can then capture what has been spent on this whole process, and you've just got a high-level track of that budget as well. And similarly to the land access, you can evaluate at set periods how well this resettlement is going. Now, this is important because you need to, as an operation, to go to ensure that the community is happy with the progress, that you're not picking up anything that was not agreed to, that whoever the contractor, whoever is involved with this resettlement process is performing as required. So it's good to have that close association with this whole resettlement process. Right, and on that note, I would like to then just wrap it up. So we've taken you through the engagement process. We've taken you through the socioeconomic development aspects, tracking metrics, importantly, capturing details on initiatives and commitments, and then the ability to track information regarding land access and resettlement. Now that bundle or basket, if managed correctly, provides an operation with a very sound approach to reducing your social risks, ensuring processes are done successfully, and lowering your chance of disruptions in your project. And then lastly, what I want to touch on, some of these sort of surrounding functionalities. There's just one really of interest that I'd like to present here, and that's incidences. So if through social sustainability management, there is an incident of sort that you want to capture and close out, IsoMetrix has brought that particular module within social sustainability. And then in conclusion, I just wanted to mention that, by capturing your social commitments, plans, managing those social risks, managing the complaints in this one secure system that I mentioned, you've got a much better chance of building healthier social relationships with your communities and uplifting them. And on that note, I'll thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to Paige for questions.
All right, thanks so much, Robin. That was a really fantastic demonstration. I'm sure our listeners definitely have a clear idea of how the solution works, and we're just really excited to show you something that focuses on the social side of sustainability, because there's a lot of sustainability software solutions out there, and oftentimes they're heavily focused on the environmental side. So we're really excited to show you this, and hopefully you found it useful. All right, so let's see our first question here. Andrea, this one looks like it's for you.
Okay.
And it says, do you see organizations starting to prioritize social sustainability projects with the same vigor as they do their environmental sustainability programs? And it's a two-part question. Then it says, if not, what are the differences, and what do you think the reasons are for those differences?
Okay. So my perspective is that while there is progress and that it is the gap is narrowing, and people are starting to understand, or organizations are starting to understand, the tie between social and environmental, I do still think that the focus is typically weighted towards environmental, which is great. At the same time, I think it is still lacking, and people really understanding the impact, the why, and understanding it isn't just a nice to do, and really translating that into should do and will do. That's slower. So on the differences, I think specifically it's budget, also tracking, and also I think just even there's a difference in understanding. With environmental, there's usually a lot of regulatory frameworks that help people understand what their requirements are, and there's also usually a clear development of goals and targets. On the social side, there's even the concept of having targets is something that is sort of discussed, right? If we have a target, does that mean that's the only, we'll just, hire 10 people of a certain race, and then that's it? So there's a lot of question of, should we even have a target? Or if we don't have a target, will people do anything? I think it's just typically people, it's also stuff that people aren't very comfortable talking about. So the purpose of what we're doing today is to get people talking about it and to come up with some good solutions on identifying what needs to be done, the opportunities, and then how they can track towards it. If we do that, that puts it on par with the vigor that's put into environmental.
That's great, Andrea. Thanks so much. Okay, so let's go kind of back and forth, because we have a few questions for each of you here. So Robin, we'll go with you for the next one. And it says, Robin, what in your view are the key benefits of managing social risks and responsibilities using a centralized management system?
Good. So benefits, yes, there are definitely benefits with a management system, and I've seen it for those projects in remote areas, remote countries. And I'd say some of the key benefits would be having one secure system where data is safe. People can access one point of truth. You have added ability that I didn't mention during my talk, but multi-language. A system can be translated into different languages, which is highly used. We have a mobile functionality, which is highly useful for social and almost a given because of the remote areas where a lot of social engagements have to happen. So, mobile devices can have an app or a version of IsoMetrix, and that can work offline, that then when you're back in sort of connectivity, then that information will flow back through to the system and be completed there. Those are probably some of the major aspects. Just another one that I quite enjoy is that, based on certain data, notifications can go off to certain individuals. So as soon as data can be captured, it may trigger an alert or notification, which triggers a quick response. So that's another aspect I enjoy about digital management systems.
Great, Robin. Thanks so much. And I know I said I was going to go back and forth, and I will, but this question sort of follows that up. So one more for you, Robin, that says, where has IsoMetrix been used for social sustainability management, and what are some of the successes it has brought?
Yes, right. So I mentioned about the sort of remote regions. We've had a lot of projects, fortunately, well, just coincidentally enough, in Mozambique, which is near South Africa where I'm based, a lot of oil and gas reserves. And we've had a handful of big companies use IsoMetrix in Mozambique. And to be honest, I think most of them there have used our social module for managing aspects. Some have expanded it to other functionality of IsoMetrix. So those were oil and gas companies. We've had some that are based in other countries in Africa, the Congo, but those are more sort of mineral explorations. We've had companies that have a global footprint, gold companies with a global footprint, oil companies that operate globally in Papua New Guinea. They've used our social solution there. So the point is that we've actually got a global footprint in this. We've found success with IsoMetrix on the social side in a lot of different countries, in a lot of remote areas, and it's proving successful.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Robin. That's great. And we have one more question, Andrea, for you, which says, how do you suggest that the priorities and goals of communities and Indigenous communities are vetted and balanced when they conflict?
That's a great question. My perspective on this is it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the presentation. First of all, the main priority is actually understanding what the requests and what the impacts are to community and to all of the stakeholders. Typically, you do find some areas where there's rub points. There's only so many jobs to go around for project work. And then when a project is built and you become operational, sometimes those jobs even reduce even further. Access to land or access to other resources can be conflicting. So the first step is truly identifying what the issues are, where those rub points will be, doing everything you can to have highly transparent processes is important, particularly in your supply chain. Give feedback. So I guess I would say, starting at the beginning, early consultation, early understanding, both in Indigenous community and in non-Indigenous community, understanding what would be value, what would have impact, any concerns and risks that are there. Then moving through as you progress along, building plans, ensuring that those plans are transparent. When there are rub points, getting community and Indigenous community leaders together to see where you can work together and collaborate. Opportunities like joint venture partnerships and things like that, where you might have Indigenous workforce and a non-Indigenous workforce coming together either in your company or through your supply chain and through your supplier diversity program. All of those things can help balance the conflicting concerns and commitments. When you are in a situation where it is really contentious. Having proper mediation is really, really key. But that mediation, again, is all about transparency and all about the effort to really work together to solve the full stakeholder suite of concerns.
Thanks so much, Andrea. That's really excellent advice. And just being a little conscious of time here, I think we're going to wrap it up with this final question. Robin, I think you actually touched on this before, but it says, so many social sustainability activities occur in remote regions with limited or no connectivity. Does the IsoMetrix solution still operate in such cases?
Yeah, thanks. I did touch on it, but let's expand a little bit more. So the social sustainability solution was one of IsoMetrix that we first want to develop the mobile or offline capability for that reason, where a lot of those engagements with communities and stakeholders were way out of connectivity and in really remote regions. So the IsoMetrix social sustainability can be used on a mobile device. It could be a phone, it could be a tablet, it could be on your laptop. And the point then is, once you're back in connectivity, the information flows back to the central IsoMetrix system, and it's securely saved there. On that note, yes, the social side, it's any engagement, any grievance, logging details of that individual. You might need to be going around to certain houses in remote areas, capturing information on that family, and you can capture a lot of that on the mobile offline capability, and then that's synced back to the main platform once you're back in connectivity. So, quick answer, yes. I hope I gave some background to that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Robin. I think that definitely clears things up. And all right, so I guess it's time to conclude today's webinar. So I do want to thank our speakers, Andrea and Robin, again for your time and for the insights you guys have both shared. If anyone listening has questions about the presentation or about IsoMetrix's solutions, you're welcome to contact Robin Bolton and Andrea Korney directly using the emails on screen. And we also have further information and resources on our respective websites. Thank you to you guys, our audience, for your attention and for your participation today. All right, until next time, goodbye from us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.